So on New Year's morning, I went on a walk to look for snowshoe hares and also to go have a chat with a neighbor about a situation in which he and some of his friends had to clean up a property after a family with four small kids had been basically snowbound for most of the winter.
Because I remember you describing it as like a hazmat situation.
Yes, there was lots and lots of baby diapers.
Was there? I thought there were like buckets of poop and stuff.
Buckets of poop and baby diapers. I mean, and like poop and buckets of baby diapers. I mean, one of the things that impressed me when I saw it was how young the children must have been.
I'm going to finish telling that story a little bit later. It's very interesting, but it gave me a good opportunity to talk about what I'm calling practical access. Now, last time we talked about legal access. That's how you can legally access your property without trespassing. Now, if you're somebody who wants to buy water access or air access only property, those are unique situations in which you're not going to be trying to do that on your own usually, unless you are asking locals for advice on what are the conditions on this river, which are routes that you should or shouldn't be taking. Or let's say you're one of those that buys lakefront property that is like float plane in summer and ski plane in winter, and you just plan on hiring pilots to bring you in and out and bring you supplies. Well, that's the kind of thing where you don't need to ask me about that. That's somebody else's department. We're talking about travel over land. Now, if you buy off-grid property that has an actual gravel road to it, I don't have to tell you anything about that. Usually, if it's already maintained by the borough or the state, then no problem. Somebody else is going to be plowing it, sanding it, etc. There are lots of properties that are on unmaintained roads, and then you have to think about, okay, who's plowing it? Who in the neighborhood has a plow truck? Do I need to buy my own plow truck? That was our situation here. We were the first ones to live out anywhere this far. I knew that we needed to buy a plow truck, so that's one of the first things I did was buy a plow truck so that we could keep getting in and out, because we have about 3 miles of unmaintained road to get to this point. Something else that properties, even with road access, sometimes deal with is you need to look at the local area and see if your access road has muskeg to the north of it. So those are open areas without very many trees. Because what often happens is north winds are regular in the winter, and if there's a wind event, it doesn't even have to be new snow, but that wind can drift snow across your access road because it's blowing from the north. It's picking up all that snow from the muskeg and depositing it over your access road. So if you have a road that is open to the north with muskeg to the north of it, you might need to plow it even if there's no new snow, just because the wind is blowing. A lot of people will buy properties that are basically trail access. So that's where the road kind of peters out and becomes like a four-wheeler trail or a snow machine trail. And that's a situation on this trail that I'm going to talk about that kind of goes out past our place that used to be no trail there. Used to be nobody living there. And then we remember the trail got put in, people started moving out there, and then some interesting things happen.
So I want to tell the story of this trail behind me. It looks like a road. I'm not going to call it a road. I'm going to call it a trail. And here's why. It's kind of a long story, but it's a great way to illustrate what I'm talking about when I talk about practical access to some more remote / trail access / off-grid properties. So down here, the lots on the right side were owned by one guy. The lots on the left side were owned by another guy. They didn't like each other. The guy on the right side over here was a real estate agent. He had somebody come in and survey this road. This is a platted road. And he also had somebody come in and clear it with some heavy equipment. And that way he figured it would be easier to sell these lots of his on the right, since he was a real estate agent. And so he did that. And for a couple of years, there was nothing along this trail, not even any topsoil, because it had been cleared away. The road hadn't been built yet, it was just bare dirt. And when you clear the topsoil over bare dirt, that dirt underneath is not necessarily the right kind of dirt for driving on, depending on the season. Now here you can see planks sticking out. This is a place where it gets really crummy, and people have to put wood in holes in the road to make it less likely to get stuck. And that's a real thing when you're dealing with a really mucky road. Once the topsoil was cleared away, the stuff beneath it, which is very common, is a silt loam. Now this silt loam drains very slowly, and in springtime when all that snow melt is trying to go somewhere and the ground is still frozen, well, that silt loam is still saturated with water. It can become like quicksand. So one of the guys who bought lots from this real estate agent moves out here and decides he's going to build a road out to his lot. And that's what we're walking on right now. But the problem with this is that he had a limited budget and he was trying to save money. And he did a good job with what he had, but in an effort to try to save money, he took a chainsaw and he cut his roll of Typar in half. So the width of Typar that he laid down on the bare dirt was only half as wide as it should have been. And that means that people go off the side of this all the time and they get stuck in the muck because nobody has wanted to dig it up and redo it. Ooh, there's a bunny. I'm going to see if I can get that. He's probably going to go away. Oh, he's moving away. I lost him. Safety back on.
So in the last video, I talked about just because you see a road on a map, like a plat map, doesn't mean it exists. Well, I'm going to say for this context, just because you see a road in real life doesn't mean that it really exists in the sense that you think of a road. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily passable. And if you don't know who built it or how they built it or what it's made of, you're going to need to proceed with caution, because if it's topsoil, if it's like just a trail that's been worn into the topsoil, it's going to be a lot different than if that topsoil was scraped away. If you see something that's gravel, if it's just gravel, it's going to act a lot different than gravel underlain with Typar, which is the proper way to do it that you can like really drive on. So you really need to find out what the road is, what's it like, who built it, how did they build it, and the best way to do that is to ask locals.
And another thing that happened is he kind of ran out of money for gravel. And so at some point the gravel just peters out. And then it's kind of back down to bare dirt. And that kind of gives me the opportunity to talk about a few more things that happen along this road. Specifically, I want to tell about two particular families that bought property farther out this road, and their different approaches to trying to homestead out here. Now, trying to live full time is a lot different than having like a seasonal cabin where if you're coming out in winter, you just use snow machine, no problem. Or you just cart out your four-wheeler, if you're just coming out for the occasional weekend. And there are a couple of weekender cabins out here owned by people up in Anchorage in the valley. And those guys are actually pretty good at getting out because they know how to get unstuck when they get stuck. They've been stuck on this road many times themselves, and they know that if it's summer and you want to get unstuck, well, you always have a jack in your vehicle, you always have some boards, you always have some shovels, and in a worst case scenario, you start digging, get some boards out, put a jack on the boards, start to jack up your vehicle, put boards under the wheels when you can, and you'll, maybe make a situation where you can drive out of it. Now, if you look under the snow there, you'll see there's a pallet sitting under the snow by the side of the road here. And similarly, right across the other side of the road here is another pallet. Most of the other stuff that was jettisoned here has been covered up by snow. What happened here was there was a family who had bought property out this road, and they were going to come up and homestead. They showed up in spring with a trailer. They hadn't really scoped it out ahead of time. I think maybe they had come out to look at the property one time, but that had been when the road was good. And they didn't know what it was like during breakup. And they come out in spring with their big old trailer. It's like 11 o'clock at night, and they get it stuck. And they're trying to drive straight to their property. They're going to just start camping on it and building right away. Or at least that's their plan. And one of the neighbors comes to help them out. And they have to basically jettison a whole bunch of stuff that they had on their trailer. And for years, there's been piles of stuff on either side of the road. Actually the neighbor who bought the cabin that had been built by the guy who made this half-Typar road, comes and helps them out. I think they drove their truck back to the start of the trail and parked it there. And then they just did some tent camping on their property for a night or two before they realized we have to change plans. Now that's a good thing, actually. A lot of people don't realize that they have to change plans, and they try to force it. They decided that they still wanted to live in the area, but they camped at a regular campground in town for months. They camped all summer long, and they're a big family. And they made it work. I mean, they are people with tenacity, but they weren't so stubborn as to say, no, we're going to make this happen no matter what. The access of their property was not what they thought it was, and they weren't going to be able to be driving in and out every day to do the things they needed to do, like go to work. So they haven't officially given up. They actually still live in Alaska. They're living on grid, just kind of regular Alaskan lifestyle. And I think they still plan to homestead out here one day. But they had the intelligence to recognize that the access to our property does not align with our needs at the time. So we're going to go try something else for a while. And I applaud them for that decision. Right at this point in the road, actually right at this curve up here, there was another guy who drove his vehicle out in springtime to look at some property for sale. And again, with no topsoil on this part of the road, and this is a part after the Typar and gravel peter out, that he got sunk up to his axle in some really wet silt loam. It was still the part of spring where it freezes in the night and the ground gets hard. So what I told him, I said, wait until like right before sunrise, when it's as cold as it's going to get and the ground is as firm as it's going to get. And with the tools that we gave him, shovels and boards, and I think he already had a jack, he was able to get out. And what he did first thing in the morning when the ground was still firm is he drove back out of here, and he never came back. But there was another family that wanted to move out here and do the homesteading thing. And I'm using these families as examples because I assume if you're watching this channel that you're probably somebody who wants to homestead in Alaska. And they come out here with a pickup truck and actually a two-wheel drive SUV, are going to be driving way, way out. And in fact, where you see this pickup parked here, this is the end of the usually drivable road. Anyway, so this family comes and moves out here with not a whole lot. They were going to be living in a tent that can have a wood stove in it. They had to burn a ton of firewood to keep it warm. And they didn't even have the appropriate tools for getting firewood. So they wasted a ton of their energy getting firewood that was mostly wasted because they didn't have a very energy efficient place that they were heating. And as we continue down the trail, from this point, they still lived another mile out. So that's something to keep in mind.
So I saw these trucks and I knew that some of our part-time neighbors were out at their kind of weekend cabin. Now, the way that they do it is in wintertime, this is a common thing to do, is you Bring your snow machine out in the back of your pickup, park as close as you can, and then you snow machine the rest of the way. Once the ground is frozen and there's snow on it, you can snow machine just about anywhere that it's legal to ride.
Now, the trail was coming out of there. I turned around to film this because it goes from narrow to really wide, and that's because right here is a spot. Again, there's no topsoil here. This is just four-wheeler trail at this point, but it has become a muck hole, and you can't tell it right here. It's really depressed right here, actually. You can see it sinks down a bit. But what happens is this is an area that doesn't drain. It's a little bit of a basin. And so when it fills with water, what people do is they, okay, well, I'll drive next to it. I'll drive around it. And then that area gets depressed and fills with water. They say, okay, well, I'll drive around it. And so that area gets depressed and filled with water. And eventually, you have this big old wide muck hole that is expanded to the point that the vegetation will allow it to expand. But there was a time when the dad of this family, the one that was living in a tent, he got his truck stuck down here in this muck hole, and it was fall time. And what happens, he got stuck, he couldn't get unstuck. So he walks back to their camp, and he comes back the next day, and we had been out this trail and noticed the truck was stuck, and so we talked to him about it. And because it was fall time, he had gotten stuck, and then his truck got frozen in place. And he didn't know what to do about it. So what we recommended is we took a page out of the old Klondike Gold Prospector handbook. They used to build bonfires on the ground to thaw out gravel to then continue to process looking for gold. And so I said, well, you know, you can thaw out the ground with a bonfire. And just don't make it too close to your truck. And he did actually get his truck unstuck. But at some point, they had to accept that they could no longer continue driving out to their camp, and they started parking a mile in. Now, one of their vehicles, their two-wheel drive vehicle, was stuck out at that camp for the whole winter. There is no way they were going to get it back out. Not till spring. In fact, probably not till midsummer. But anyway, so they had to start parking a mile away from their camp and walking in and out. Now, I had told them the absolute most important thing that you can do for you and your family's safety this winter is to get snowshoes and a sled, because you can then pull your kids in and out on the sled. They won't get exhausted. And depending on what kinds of storm conditions we get, if there's a big old blizzard and you and your kids are stuck at camp and you don't have snowshoes and a sled, you're basically stuck. I mean, you could shovel out of it, but depending on the drifting, you will exhaust yourself and possibly die of exhaustion and hypothermia before you finish shoveling to any kind of maintainable trail. Again, because it depends on the drifting, mostly when there's a blizzard. So one thing that I had told him, other than this snowshoe and sled thing, I had found a spot maybe 100, 150 feet from the main packed trail that had a few good standing dead spruce. In fact, oh, there's a standing dead spruce right there. There's a little one standing next to a living one. There's a little standing dead. Those are the kind you want to cut for firewood. So I had pointed out a few of those that were not too far off the trail. And I assumed that at this point, he had invested in some snowshoes and a sled, because that would be an easy walk from the trail, and then you cut the tree down, you cart it out on your sled. No such thing. Instead, what he did was he took his shovel and he dug a path through thigh-deep snow for like 150 feet to get to these trees, and he pulled them out that way. I don't think they even had a sled at this point. He just hauled them out piece by piece. And it's just mind-boggling to me to waste that much of your own energy when you don't have to. All you have to do is pack down a little trail with your snowshoes. The sled pulls right behind it, and you'd save so much energy getting your firewood. These people nearly starved. I mean, you saw them come out in springtime and they were skeletal. And their kids were not in good shape either. In fact, somebody had called in a, what do they call it, a welfare check. And then after that, the state started getting involved. And the state actually called me to ask me, what do these people need to do? And I said, the first thing they need is a sled, because they had a toddler who was having to either be carried or walk a mile back to camp through snow that was sometimes a bit, sinky, facing north into sub-zero wind chills. And it's like, you can't make a toddler walk a mile into sub-zero wind chills through sinky snow on a regular basis. And it started to be that they were coming in and out very rarely. And I was starting to bring loads of groceries to them. I mean, there was another incident where we took our kids out. We just kind of, we go on walks on trails all the time. We took our kids on a walk. We'll go see those people. Kids will play. And we had, when we do this, we usually bring a thermos with ourselves, and we bring lunch because we know we're going to get hungry. And so we get to their camp, and we break out our sandwiches to eat for our own lunch. And their kids just descend on us, and they basically took our sandwiches because they were starving. And so we're like, okay, fine, have our sandwiches. I didn't know you were that hungry. If I had known, I would have brought more food. And that was kind of the point that we knew that we needed to start getting them some groceries, things like that. But they only stayed that one winter. When they left their property, they sold it to the people who own the property next to it. That's some of these weekenders whose trucks I just walked past. So you see some fence posts here. These are remnants from that family that camped here all winter in their tent with a wood stove, and for some reason they thought it was a priority to build a 4-foot tall fence that would do absolutely no good against any bear or moose, or human for that matter, because they never had any animals out here, domestic-wise, so I don't understand. So I'm here with Travis, who is one of the people that bought that lot I was talking about, next door neighbor here. And I thought it'd be better for him to describe what it was like to clean up after a winter's worth of being mostly stuck in place. So why don't you tell us what it was that you found once you decided to buy the property and clean it up?
Well, we knew, so we referred to them as the Carolinians, and I think that's approximately where they were from, somewhere down south, and they had some ambitions up here, which were a little bit hard to suss out. We kind of thought maybe they had the wrong idea when we saw the lawnmower come.
I forgot about that.
And they started building a fence, or putting in fence posts on the perimeter before they had any place to sleep at night. They were living in a Cabela's tent, not even a wall tent, but just a nylon tent. And then I believe they were warming themselves up by running their car, which had been stuck out here and snowbound all winter.
It wasn't a wall tent. It was like a big tent, not technically a wall tent, but they had a stove in there.
Yeah, like a nylon tent.
Yeah, it was not canvas though, I don't think.
But they decided it wasn't for them, and so we bought the lot from them, and knowing that they were snowbound and that it was a particularly unpleasant winter for them, we gave them an opportunity to leave their stuff there until June, to solstice. By the time they left, they had taken what they thought was valuable and left everything behind, including diapers and all the garbage that you accumulate in a year. Plastic everything, nothing that could have helped them, I wouldn't have thought, in their homestead. And now it's mostly clean, with the occasional unearthing of something that you might find up there, but it's worth mentioning. I think they got more than they bargained for when they came out here.
Because I remember you describing it as like a hazmat situation.
Yes, there was lots and lots of baby diapers.
Was there? I thought there were like buckets of poop and stuff.
Buckets of poop and baby diapers. I mean, and like poop and buckets of baby diapers. I mean, one of the things that impressed me when I saw it was how young the children must have been.
Yeah. I think he only had a pellet gun.
Oh.
And I think he hunted out all the spruce grouse.
No, I saw this past fall. There was definitely some wood grouse. There was wouldn't say there were. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what he was eating or what they were doing, but
Well, they were eating what they
the rabbit influx. So
what they were eating what they could find here, plus some groceries that I was bringing them. But
Yeah.
I always tell people they still owe me for a load of groceries, but I really don't care.
Yeah. No, I wish them well. I know they had a real tough time. I don't begrudge them the situation that they were in, but I do wish they had picked up their trash.
And so when we talk about practical access, it's not just a matter of being able to legally get to a place, it's being able to actually get yourself and your stuff to that place. Now, earlier I mentioned a best way to do it. The best way to do it is to not start in spring. The best way to do it is to start in winter. If you go and live someplace near the property, especially if it's like a trail access only property, if you live in town, get a job, rent a place, whatever, like I talked about in the previous video, making connections, etc. Then what most people do who already live in Alaska, whether they're trying to homestead or trying to do just like a weekend off-grid cabin, is you get your snow machines, you get some cargo sleds, and you cart things out over winter when access is super easy. And that way you can take all of your building supplies out to your property. You don't have to worry about your trailer getting bogged down in muck. You don't have to worry about a lot of these situations. And you can also make sure that you're putting things in place that will be necessary for your survival. Because it's not just a matter of getting there. It's also a matter of getting back out again if you need to. Do you have a plan for that? Some people clearly don't. Do you have snowshoes and a sled? Do you have enough snowshoes and sleds for your whole family? Do you have a way to communicate in case of emergency? Is your cell phone charged? Do you have a way of charging it, right? What if you're like these people we were talking about? All they have is like their vehicle that they're running to get warm and charge their phones. What happens when that runs out of gas or when the alternator fails or whatever? If there was an accident, could you get out? Could emergency services get in? Do you even have a way of contacting them if you need them? If you aren't able to get in and out reliably, how are you taking your waste out? How are you getting supplies in? What happens when you hunt out your immediate area and burn all of the decent firewood and you don't have a good gun for bigger game? You don't have enough gas for your chainsaw. You don't have enough energy to haul your firewood because you don't have snowshoes and a sled. Do you have plans for any of these things? Now, I talked a lot about this family, but the fact is we had offered them help beyond just buying them groceries. We had a cabin that was insulated and had a wood stove, had road access, much closer to town than even our own house. And they refused because it was this attitude of, nope, we've got to do it our way and on our own. The point is there's a lot of needless suffering and could very easily have ended very badly. They had sealed up all of the ventilation parts of their tent so that it didn't have as much cold air blowing in, but that ventilation is kind of necessary. They never once cleaned the wood stovepipe. They would just smack on it to try to knock things out of it. They also had a little like mini tent connected to the entrance where they had a generator and they would run that in the mini tent. And so when you're combining all these elements, wood stove that you're never cleaning, closing off all the ventilation in your tent, running a generator in the little foyer vestibule tent that's attached to the entrance, it's a recipe for disaster beyond just the situations with being hungry. And it was very likely that they were going to burn themselves down if they continued doing what they were doing.